I call this May 2025 meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents to order. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Here. Thanks to everyone for joining us in the West Committee room. While today's meeting is not being live streamed, the recording will be uploaded and archived to the board's YouTube channel after today's meeting. A quick note for committee members and presenters, you'll notice the West Committee room has microphones in front of you. They are live, and they replaced the room-wide microphones. Is that true? Okay. The microphones.
They are different, but they're here.
Okay, so here we go. This is to improve the audio for both the in-room audiences and those watching the recording. This is because they give me this nice script to read, and I thought, surely this is true, but okay, with that, let me welcome our student representatives for today. On Zoom, Lindsay House, hello, from the Morris campus, who is attending virtually. I would also like to welcome Chair Farnsworth, who's joining us via Zoom this morning, or will be. The first item this morning is to hear an overview of research compliance administration across the university system. Here to present this item are Associate Vice President for Research Integrity and Compliance, Joanne Billings, and Danielle Runtala, Director of Research Integrity and Compliance. Welcome, and please begin when you're ready.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Gully and committee members. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk on this topic today. So our goals for the presentation, we really plan to highlight our system-wide research compliance administration processes, roles, and responsibilities. We hope that we can share the importance of the research compliance to the research enterprise. We want to explore the challenges and opportunities in the research compliant processes and insurance. And lastly, this is the opportunity for us to inform the committee to gain further information about critical administrative components of the research enterprise. So some of these components of the research compliance enterprise. So as we discuss the different units that we'll talk about going forward, you will see that there are oversight, leadership, training and education, communication, auditing and monitoring, enforcement and response to research issues that support ethics and integrity in research in each of these units. In the oversight, we manage research compliance policies and procedures and ensure policies are in alignment with all federal and state regulatory requirements. With leadership, we have designated Associate Vice President for Research Integrity and Compliance with oversight of research compliance committees, which we'll discuss, and then the Associate Vice President of Administration with the oversight of sponsored projects. These units provide and curate training and education to support the culture of ethics and compliance. They provide routes of communication for reporting issues and communicating with research personnel. They also provide support for quality assurance, monitoring, and site visits. They enforce policy standards and regulations, and also allow for prompt reporting to research compliant related issues and coordinating response with schools, colleges, and for corrective actions. So some of the key RIO administrative units. So RIO is home to these units that carry out many of the components of research compliance. The Human Research Protection Program also included is the Institutional Review Board, which facilitates clinical trial human participant subject review and approval. They have quality assurance and they do education as well. There's the Animal Care and Use Committee, which also is responsible for protocol review and approval, inspections of facilities, and training and education of PIs and their staff. The Office of Biotechnology and Activities Oversight, which includes the Institutional Biosafety Committee, which is also responsible for protocol review and approval, and they also have committees for stem cell research and dual use research. There's the Research and Integrity and Compliance unit, which involves export controls and research security, the Certified Approver Program, responsible conduct of research education, research misconduct. And then there's the Sponsor Projects Administration, which is managed by the Associate Vice President for Administration, which is responsible for grant administration, contracts, and effort reporting.
Of course, none of this is possible without our key partners across the university. So we don't work alone. We partner with Health, Safety, and Risk Management, HSRM, with the units like environmental health and safety, biosafety, occupational health, controlled substances, radiation safety, research safety, and enterprise risk management. These programs collaborate with us to uphold the high standards of safety in our research environments, and they support the protection of research personnel engaging in the activities with hazardous materials. We also partner with institutional compliance. They provide the conflict of interest program and interest and commitment program, the reporting system U-Report they manage and oversee, and they facilitate the oversight of university administrative policies that we partner on. The Office of General Counsel, of course, partners with us not only when situations arise that require legal consultation, but also for ensuring we follow all regulatory requirements for handling cases of research misconduct, conflicts of interest, animal welfare, human participants in research, et cetera. The Office of Internal Audit also partners with us to identify gaps in research compliance through the internal audit process, and they coordinate reviews when compliance issues arise. And lastly, we also partner with Health Information Privacy Compliance Officer, HIPCO, to conduct ancillary reviews of research studies by the IRB to ensure compliance with HIPAA and review research issues related to PHI, private health information.
So everyone engaged in research plays a role in research compliance. And they have many responsibilities that come along with their roles. And it really starts with the principal investigator and their research team. They are responsible for carrying out their research following all applicable policies, procedures, and regulatory requirements. PIs are responsible for finding funding, managing their teams, but they also have to ensure that they and their staff are appropriately trained to do the research that they propose that they're going to conduct, and that they have the expertise available to them to do it. The PIs have to ensure that their research base are providing a safe environment that fosters collaboration, innovation, and high standards of integrity. The research personnel can include students, postdocs, technicians, and scientists. Sponsors in research also have a critical role in ensuring compliance. They have to select qualified investigators, ensure that the protocols and regulations are followed, and maintain proper monitoring and reporting of studies. The schools and colleges with the deans, the research associate deans, and department chairs are responsible for the oversight of ethics and compliance in their school and colleges. Research associate deans promote research integrity and ethics and support research safety, support researchers finding funding, and represent their school or college as a liaison between research compliance administration and the research community. Department chairs focus on ensuring policies and regulations within their departments. Unit administration includes grant administrators that provide grant support from pre to post award and ensuring compliance with award spending, and certified approvers review transactions from sponsored projects to assure applicable policies, procedures, and regulations are being followed. So there's a handling of research compliance issues. So Research Compliance Administration and these units handle complex research issues that may arise in addition to facilitating compliance. Compliance committees such as the IRB, IACUC, IBC handle issues that pertain to their research studies in their purview and issue expectations in collaboration with their unit leaders. An example of this would be the IRB with their mandatory reporting to the FDA on unanticipated problems involving risk to subjects or others, non-compliance, serious non-compliance under studies that are under FDA regulation. Myself as the research integrity officer carefully examines, and I should say and my team carefully examines allegations of research misconduct, detrimental research practices, and issues of research integrity, and manage allegations of misconduct and in following the policies and procedures associated with assessment, inquiry, and investigation. The deans and department chairs support these compliance issues, particularly collaborating to take actions in situations where issues have occurred as well as working with HR in cases of workplace conduct in the research environment, authorship disputes, detrimental research practice that may require discipline. Direct supervisors collaborate with all these people to address issues and facilitate the issuance of administrative actions.
So I'm sure all of you are very much aware of all the challenges that we face in research compliance. The regulatory landscape in research compliance has rapidly been evolving for the last few years. We've even seen in the last week rapidly changing things right now. And so we have to be very agile in how we understand, interpret, and implement all of the changing requirements. According to the Council on Governmental Relations, or COGR, since 1991, we have gone from one federal research requirement to 270 research requirements in 2024. 62% of these requirements were implemented between 2014 and 2024. So that's a very quick, very short time to have to adapt. As we navigate these requirements to support research, the burdens and the expectations of the personnel engaged in research also increases, becoming increasingly burdensome and complex, such as many training requirements. Training needs to be meaningful, impactful, and effective with minimizing burden. As these requirements continue to increase, data security and privacy requires constant attention. Conflicts of interest and commitment must be managed, and the global collaboration is also being very highly regulated. Trying to meet all of these requirements while also fostering a culture of integrity and ethics puts constraints on resources, staff, and the researchers. At the same time, we are trying to ensure that research is being conducted ethically and with integrity. So how are we supporting that? We continue to work very hard to support our vast research enterprise here at the university through outreach and educational opportunities, such as Research Ethics Week. Our IRB, IACUC, and IBC carefully review and manage our study protocols and ensure that we are complying with all of those regulatory requirements. Research compliance administrators work very closely with our partners to advocate for resources. Our personnel are well networked within the Big Ten, and we strive to make ourselves well known at the national level as leaders in research ethics and integrity. And when issues do arise, we carefully examine the issues following federal, state, and institutional policies and procedures. That said, compliance often is presented as an expense. It's not an expense. We are the money saver. It can be very difficult to manage. And yes, we take resources, but consider the costs of when there is non-compliance or when major issues arise. And so now we have a couple questions maybe for you. How do we assure and educate the public regarding compliance and integrity in research at the university? What integrity and compliance challenges exist when the university partners with the business community? And how does integrity and compliance stay in step with the rapidly evolving science and technology environment?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your great presentation. I'll open it up for discussion. Yeah, no.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Gully. Long time no see. Director Intala, Dr. Billings, appreciate talking to you all again on the same topic, really. Well, kind of. The money savers, this is what you dubbed yourself now. This is very helpful, and I'm between a few slides here, just looking at the Rio administrative units and the partners. And then you also have that circle with the different responsibilities. Can you make this real for us in terms of, here's a hypothetical research project. The PI, went out and got a grant. Now, how might Rio come in? How might the Animal Care and Abuse Committee come in? And then we then consult with internal audit for this, the general counsel for that. Can you kind of tie in how those all tie in for a hypothetical or a real, example that could be anonymized?
I think you'd be perfect
Yeah.
as a PI herself.
Well, thank you, Chair Gully and Regent Kenyon. I think that's a great question. Hypothetical. So I can speak to my experience. I am a physician who does clinical research. And so I work with foundations, I work with business and industry, and all through a network that I'm a part of. It's all cystic fibrosis research. And so when a clinical trial is brought to us, and it could be, again, business and industry and an interventional where we're investigating a new product, for example, investigational product like a new medication. So the protocol comes to me and my team. It will then be, we have a way of kind of bringing it out to the different people. It will have to be looked at for a budget. So there's a budget development that occurs. So we work hand in hand with entities at the university for pricing. There is also contracts. So Sponsor Projects Administration is responsible for, first off, really, we have a non-disclosure agreement, especially with business and industry that we have to kind of sign first before we can get anything so that they're aware that we are not sharing information beyond our group. So that we work with them. And then Sponsor Project also works on the contract after that. We also then work with our institutional review board because it is involving human participants, the research that I do. So there is an application and process that goes through through the IRB. And the IRB also curates all the answer review that's involved. So if it involves, for example, often it's HIPAA, so HIPCO will review it. If it involves radiation, the radiation safety group will review it. If it's something that is an FDA product, we have a group that looks at products that the FDA is looking at, so they kind of assure that we are following all those rules. And so many answer reviews can happen according to what the protocol is about. I'm trying to think of all these other levels. And then we work with, because it's, we partner with Fairview. Fairview is also is responsible for doing review as well. So all this work has to happen before we can even start to do the research. So we touch a lot of these different entities. In one case, when we're dealing with one product, we had to go to the IBC to assure the safety of the staff when we were administering the medication. So they were also involved, and that happens often for, my colleagues. So lots of different groups are touched through this. And all of this approval has to happen before we can even, start looking at or calling and contacting a participant. Like, we can't move forward until we're totally ready to go. And this could take months, as you can imagine, because there's a lot of people that are involved. And then there's continued oversight. We have to do continuing review. If there's changes to the protocol, we have to submit that to the IRBs. So the process continues. It doesn't end once the research starts.
No, very, very helpful. And that did answer much of that. And you answered my next question, which is the continuing, review. It doesn't become stale or whatever because things are changing. Is the RIO or IRB acting as the coordinator to then determine this needs to go here, or does everyone kind of have visibility into it and say, we'd actually like to weigh in versus no, we're good?
That's another great question. So when we are filling out an IRB application, we actually there's a checklist involved on who we think needs to touch it, if it does involve radiation safety, and so that we do help kind of curate that, but they also are allowed then to say, no, we also think it needs this review. So it's kind of a hand-in-hand thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Kind of making sure that we cover everything.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Kelly. Regent Kenyon, one thing I just would like to emphasize with this is that oversight piece. I think it's a great question. Ultimately, a lot of that responsibility then falls on the PI and the PI's team to make sure that they're complying with all of the requirements that were laid out by the IRB, by SPA, by anybody else. And so once it is active, there is a large role that is played by the folks who are actually doing that research work. And so when you see our internal audit reports and we have done reviews of sponsored projects, and we identify issues or we identify areas for improvement, we're really looking at that management that's happening within the college, within the department, the PIs, at that level. And a lot of that work ultimately does end up there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair and speakers. I have just a comment on that, because it's, I don't know if I understand this all really well. So I appreciated the presentation. But it seems like, I mean, it's hard to think of being adaptive when you have to control for so much, right? But I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how do we keep ourselves, I guess, in that kind of adaptive mode, especially in that third question of like things evolving so quickly and yeah, technology changing and all of those things. I'm curious, what do we currently do to remain adaptive in terms of that kind of compliance structure? Or do we belong to lots of other networks? Or I'm just curious how the field is thinking about it, because I'm sure we're not the only ones dealing with it, right? So, maybe I'll start there and then I'll add my second question. Yeah.
Thanks for the great question, Regent. So it's a very nuanced question because, of course, when we talk about ourselves, we're only one small piece of the puzzle. And so to be agile, many of us are very much connected to our Big 10 partners nationally through organizations or through other groups that help us remain agile and be able to be adaptive to the ever evolving, changing situations. Like myself, I belong to the Big 10 Academic Alliance Responsible Conduct of Research Group, so I work with them very closely. Both of us are part of the Association of Research Integrity Officers. And so when we have these adapting, policies and regulations, we can work together to have something more cohesive to roll out to the research community. You have all seen what Sponsored Projects has been doing to make sure that the community, university community is well aware of the evolving regulations and changes with sponsored awards and the different agencies. A lot of it is just boots on the ground. We're either reading articles, and myself, I get the Federal Register every morning, and then I read the Federal Register over like the overview and make sure that if anything changed overnight, that we can respond accordingly very quickly to help support the research community. That's kind of our role, as being supportive to that, and making sure that we're communicating it so that they're not left in the dark about things that are changing very quickly. And in terms of the research side, for us, we try to make sure that if we are having to increase burden, because unfortunately that is one of the things that does go with changing regulations, that we are doing it in a manner that's least impactful to the amount of time they have to spend on whatever that change is, while also making it meaningful for them so that they understand why the change had to happen and how we can help support that to minimize their burden.
Okay, thanks. My second question, am I okay? Timing, is, on that second discussion question that you had about working with business community or partners, I am curious, how does it currently work? Because, we do a lot of research here that obviously benefits businesses and things like that, and it is so crucial for their success. But I'm curious, what is in place and what is our rigor about kind of, managing conflicts and then protecting kind of research integrity and that kind of thing. So I would love to just hear a little bit more, and what is that process along the way?
Yeah, that would be.
So another good question, Regent, from our question. One of the pieces, so you mentioned conflicts of interest. So we have a committee that looks at conflicts of interest and commitments to make sure that when there are these partnerships between people that are in the research community and industry, that we are doing things, in an ethical manner, that it also doesn't compromise, of course, their commitment to the university as an employee. And that committee is really facilitated by Office of Institutional Compliance. I serve on it. Some of us in this room, we all serve in different roles in it. That's one piece of it. And I'll let Dr. Billings maybe talk more to the research integrity piece of how we kind of handle that with industry. And those, we haven't had too much. But.
Right, we haven't had to. So yeah, thank you, Regent. I would say, there are some things that are, when I'm thinking about, my experience with clinical research and working with business and industry, that is, usually something that is, well regulated because oftentimes the FDA is involved in other entities, so that, there is a lot of regulation around that. When it comes to kind of the bigger, enterprise, I think that that's where Rio comes in, and, Dr. Priyan, his responsibility for engaging our business partners. And so I don't want to overspeak for him in that role. But I know that there's a lot of work done at that level.
Thank you, Chair Gelly. One other item I would add, Regent Taurabe, to your question on conflict of interest. In addition to the individual conflict of interest piece, there's also institutional conflict
Yes.
of interest. And
Yes.
I actually serve on that committee as appointed by the board, as well as there's other administrators, faculty members, and community members that serve on that. And the question of institutional conflict of interest is when the university, let's say, has a patent or potential royalties on a particular drug, and we're looking at doing research related to that drug, or we're looking to have participants enroll in a study. So we say, what is the compelling reason why we should do that here versus somewhere else, given that there is this conflict? And so we will review those to assess whether that compelling reason exists. So it's just another layer at the institutional level in addition to the individual level.
Helpful.
Regent Kenyatta.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Gully. I know it's running out of time, but just some closing comments. This discussion's been helpful to me. A couple things stood out. I mean, one, as Chief Auditor was saying earlier, that kind of crystallized it for me. It seems like Rio and the whole apparatus, I mean, all your partners are going to help the PI, really consider all the things, the animal care, the health and safety, the researchers, the legal risks, the conflict of interest. But they then have to take that and own that and put that, Director Intala, Dr. Billings, you're not in every lab, every day, and enforcing that. So that's helpful for me that, that's the institutional responsibility, to have that apparatus to give him the support. And I imagine the PIs don't read is it the register, you said?
I can quite assure you that does not happen.
They don't read that daily. But that responsibility really is on a PI, and I think we provide the education. That's helpful for me. The other thing I just like to call out, it's been alluded to and we're all aware of, it's probably a wild job to have right now.
Yeah.
But I suspect it was always kind of, I mean, you told us what's happened in the past decade, like how that ballooned and whatnot. And I mean, I'm just hoping we can all appreciate like how evolving and complex compliance is and has been, and certainly in research integrity, but being on this committee everywhere. I mean, I think if I see the controller, if we go into accounting, I'm sure the same things happened over the past, student records, I mean, just everything. And you talked about being the money savers, which is true, but I mean, the flip side of that, we have to keep this in context when we think about and discuss our budgets, that this is, people group this administrative category into the other. This is what's happening, and this is, human research protection, like that isn't that large category that we just, clump all together. So again, thank you for the presentation and for the work. And obviously it's wild right now, but it's always been complex, I imagine. And yeah, no question there, but thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have a couple, if no one else. First, I can't remember what questions you put on the screen, but I was wondering, how can we support talking with the public about this process? Because I think, obviously we've had some, without getting into details, we've had some issues in the news recently, and I think any ways that we can sort of support talking about the in-depth process that we have at the university would be really helpful. And then my second question is separate, but I'll ask them together. In your professional circles, in what are the major conversations that you're having about evolving changes in this? So I'm thinking about, of course, like the current administration and those challenges are one thing. and affecting people's research and what they're allowed to do, but also things like AI. I mean, they're really rapidly evolving. Can you talk about some of the, without, you don't have to like get into significant details. I realize that could take all day, but what are the things that people are talking about the most at this moment?
So thanks, Chair Kelly. I'll start with the first half if you want. So just talking about how to communicate to the public. I think it's just, I think a presentation like this is important for people to understand that, we have many, many different units and, partner with many different groups to make sure that we, that people are safe in their environment, that they have the resources so that they can successfully implement research, that we have oversight education programs. And these are always evolving. We're not, there's a continuation to all of this. It's not stagnant. It responds to the community needs. It responds to changes in, our environment and our, the different regulations. And, IRB has a newsletter. IACUC does a lot of communication with members and its communities. And so it's a constant evolving education. And so just if that can be kind of socialized, that so that people realize that, yes, these processes are in place. They've been there, for a very, very long time. And many, many parts of it, that it's not just the oversight, it's the education, and auditing and, making sure that it's all continuing to, that people are doing their job well.
And the second part, I'm just thinking in my head of the AI, and so Regent Gully, that's a really great question because it's a very challenging and complex space, as Provost Crowson can talk about as well, with the educate or with the academic side, and research is no exception to that. And our, when we are within our working groups, I know with the Big Ten RCR group, when we're talking about responsible conduct of research, where does AI lie in that has been a very big topic of conversation. We held a conference, a day-long conference for everybody in the Big Ten last year on AI, particularly focused on authorship. And how do you cite, are you supposed to be citing it? What are journals saying? Are you allowed to use it when you're writing, writing up your research? How would you use it in your research? Who owns the data once it goes into whatever, large learning model you're using? And so there's a lot of things that, go into thinking about that. And so those are conversations we are having. Those help us then facilitate how we handle it at the university level, and how we develop procedures, processes, and policy. And I know that there are policies directly in the works right now by multiple people within the university regarding the use of AI, but also how we develop AI and get into that. We want to also be innovators. And so how do we help facilitate that from our office, and what are the ethics that we have to consider with that? There was a really great conference this year here at the University of Minnesota hosted by the Consortium on Law and Values that focused on the ethics of AI and research as well. So we are trying to stay future forward on that area. And anytime there are these big scale changes, we really do try to make sure that we are having the conversations together so that when we go back to our institutions, we're doing it as a collaborative approach versus saying, well, we're just going to do it this way. We don't ever want to be that way. We want to be kind of following each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can I add a little bit to that? I appreciate the comment, Chair Gully, and the response. I mean, as a practitioner, I work with communities all the time. And I think that there's so much good research that communities actually don't ever really know how to deploy and put into practice. And so I know, I think that it is it is a worthy discussion, and, you know, that it's not just because of what's happening here, but I think that there are important ways to think about how research moves from being research and theories, right, to actually being demonstrated through practice. And so I hope that however we frame it, we also talk about that kind of process, because I think that what gets lost is that it becomes kind of a debate about, you know, the research itself and all of those things. And I think that, you know, we have the opportunity to be able to take somebody's research and actually put it into practice. And in order to do that, you do have to be able to talk about what that theories is and what the research behind is. And so there's a whole lot of things that go into that, but I wanted to kind of just thread it because I think that that is really important. And I think it's unfortunate that we have a debate about research and the purity of research without understanding how we actually take research to practice. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Regent Johnson.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, and I totally sympathize with you. I had a job once where I had to read through the congressional record every day and then looking for the words Native American, Indian, or Indigenous, and sometimes it's hard to spot. But I'm just wondering, when a new administration comes in like this, if you notice a change in the tone of the regulations, this is an administration where there's a lesser focus on.
Trick question.
I'm just curious how it changed, how the policies change with it when a new administration comes in like this.
So that's a great question, Regent Johnson. And politics aside, there have been bipartisan efforts to really heavily focus on certain aspects of research policy for a while now. For example, research security has been a bipartisan effort through multiple administrations. There has been a concerted effort to increase regulatory requirements in that space. And even when there's a change in the administration, that is a consistent thread that has been going on since President Obama, when he was in office. And so, and big part of that is technology, right? Because technology is evolving so fast. Obviously, we want to keep pace with the rest of the globe, and they're also worried about where our research goes. And so that's national security, research security has been something that's bipartisan. And again, even with the current administration, many of the general policies that they have been focused on are still things that have been focused on by more than one administration. And there are concerns. For example, a very recent one is the dual use research of concern. That has been something that has been contentious for the last 20 years, since the early 2000s, when there was some influenza research that went on that really sparked some controversy. And that is something that, no matter the administration, is going to be a very contentious issue of how it's handled. It's either all or nothing. And I think that the biggest things that we see shifts in are really also kind of to prioritize whatever their big objectives are for how they see the research enterprise in the United States at that time, of what they want to focus on and what they want to drive forward in terms of innovation. And so that will really drive whatever the policies will be going forward. But in terms of it changing between presidential administrations, a lot of it is bipartisan when it comes to research policy. So it is still something that will be often consistent.
Thank you both so much for being here and for your great presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our second item of business is to review the proposed amendments to the Office of Internal Audit Charter and its processes. The proposed amendments are before us today for review and are scheduled to return for action in the June meeting based on feedback from this discussion. So, and with that, I will turn it over to Chief Auditor Goswick.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Gully, and members of the committee. So while we're waiting here for the presentation to pull up, There we go. So as you mentioned, we're going to be talking through the amendments to the Office of Internal Audit Charter and other processes. As Chair Gully stated, the charter is required to be approved by this committee. So this will be the discussion period, the review, and then there'll be an approval in June. These other items that I'm going to be talking through, they're really for your information or for your concurrence, but there does not need to be a formal vote on that. So for the agenda for today's meeting, I'm going to walk through the rationale for why we're making these updates, talk a little through the audit charter updates that I'm proposing. We'll discuss audit materials and report updates, especially focusing on items that would hit the committee and is related to your oversight, including some changes to our audit report. Look at other process updates really at a high level, but just for your information as part of your functional oversight of the internal audit department. Then I'll end with a brief discussion on the chief auditor reporting lines, just as that was an item that was called out in the quality assurance review for consideration by the board. So going into the rationale for the updates, beginning with that quality assurance review, as the committee should recall, there was a report that was provided to you all from our external QAR team in November of 2024 that was presented to the committee in December. Overall, it was a very, very positive report with the glowing review of generally conforms, which again is the highest possible rating you can get in one of these types of reviews. But there was also many strengths that were noted throughout the report. However, there were some opportunities identified by the QAR team for potential improvement. Those are in your document material. I believe it's page 31. If you look at page 31, I put together a table where I laid out their recommendations, and I put with that the actions in which internal audit has either already taken or are proposing to take to address each of those items. And then finally, just internal ongoing self-assessments was part of the impetus for these changes. Some of this coming out of our employee engagement survey, some staff-driven initiatives that I'll mention briefly in my presentation. For the audit charter updates, I skipped a piece. The Institute of IAA Standards, this is an important piece. So the Institute of Internal Audit changed its standards in January of 2025. As the committee likely recalls, IAA is an international body that provides the foundational framework for how we do all of our audit work. So they updated their standards in January 2025. So a number of these changes are directly related to that. And that's important because when we talk about the audit charter updates, the vast majority of these updates are really to move to the IAA standards new templates. It looks like if you look at, and I believe it's page 19 of your document materials, it looks like there are a lot of changes throughout this document. Much of that is just moving around, restating some of the things that were in the previous charter to align with that template. But there are a couple of more material changes to highlight. One is there's additional details on internal audit's responsibilities, especially related to ethics and professionalism. They're just pushing that language a little bit more. And there's some new committee reporting and approval requirements that are also baked into that. So what are those? So when we think about the process updates that we're proposing for the committee's consideration, first is additional review requirements of the internal audit department's operational duties, budget, and resources. So when I say operational duties, I'm not talking about the management of the internal audit department. That's obvious, we need to do that. But I'm talking about primarily things that have been assigned to me directly by the board. So I just mentioned the institutional conflict of interest as part of the previous presentation. That would be an example where and why that's important is if the committee wanted there to be an audit of that decision-making process, let's say, I couldn't then do that audit. We would have to hire somebody else outside to do that because I wouldn't be independent. So it's important for you to know where I have those operational duties. So I will bake that into my annual presentations to the Audit and Compliance Committee just to make sure that everybody is aware of any type of duties like that I have. There's also some additional requirements related to budget and resources, really just trying to make sure you don't have a situation where the internal audit department was being shorted and was no longer able to do their duties. So I'm going to add some additional reporting and discussion with committee leadership going into the June meeting to supplement what I already provide as kind of a high level overview of that. The second item is going to be more of a procedural item that we're going to have to work through, which is formal approval of the annual audit plan. As you all know, I bring the annual audit plan to you every June. The new requirements are going to include a formal approval. So we're gonna have to work through what that looks like, in part because the committee has not been delegated that authority, so we're going to even have to bring it to the whole board. So what's strange about this as well is to keep in mind, the Institute of Internal Audit Standards also require that it's a flexible audit plan. So that both need your approval and it needs to be flexible. So how I'm interpreting that is, you may recall in the past, we've had tier 1 and tier 2 audits, where tier 1 are the ones that we're making a more firm commitment. These will be the audits that we will prioritize and do this year, while tier 2 will be the ones that if we had resource constraints or if new risks emerged that we needed to adjust, we would adjust those and inform the committee. That's how I intend to do it, continuing going forward, where we'll get an approval of the overall plan, but I'll continue to just keep the committee informed if we make any changes to those tier 2s. While the tier 1s, I would look to work with committee leadership to approve that before I made any changes. Other changes to our document materials I plan to bring to you in June. I just think it makes more sense to see the various items as they currently are and then what we're proposing to change kind of side by side. This will both be in our internal audit update as well as in our annual audit plan documentation. For the internal audit update, some of the things we're looking at is, are there better ways to provide you information about whether the administration is effectively resolving all of the various issues that we've identified in our reports are high-risk issues. We focus a lot on that implementation rate. Is there a better way of visualizing? Is there better statistics that we could use? Also going to suggest removing some schedules that frankly we spend a lot of time putting together. And if you don't find them that valuable, we might remove them. But if you tell me they're valuable, we'll keep doing it. But I want to at least propose that to you in June as we talk through that. And then finally, again, some changes to the metrics related to our annual audit plan. Other process updates I think are important for the committee to consider or to be aware of. We're making a couple of suggestions to update our audit reports. The first is updating the issue rating system. So one of the things that came out of the QAR was some feedback that some felt that our recommendations in our audit reports were too prescriptive. They wanted more flexibility in how they address the issues. I will tell you that internal audit's position has always been that management ultimately owns the risk and they may address the risks identified in the reports any way that they see fit, and we would close the tracking of that issue if those risks were remediated. However, I recognize that how we had the appendix written in the past, that maybe wasn't always clear. The fact that we track by the implementation of recommendation, I think confused some folks. So if you look at, I believe it's page 33 of your document materials, there's a proposed update to the appendix that we would add to the end of each of our reports, where we make it clear that it is management's responsibility and ownership of the controls, also highlighting that management may accept risk when they see fit. That being said, if there was an area that was high risk that management wishes to accept, I'd bring it to the committee, as I've done in the past, so that you would be aware that management is choosing to accept that risk. Finally, just looking to simplify the titles. From going from the more esoteric, essential, significant, useful that I think people have struggled with over the years to understand, to high, medium, and low, which I think just makes a little bit more sense. I will say that we've had those same titles for over 35 years, but I think it's time that we can just move to high, medium, and low.
Past boards were smarter.
Yeah, there you go. Larger vocabulary. So the second item is looking to combine the audit report and the executive summary. I will tell you that everybody who currently receives the executive summary also receives the audit report, so it is somewhat redundant. And we do a lot of copying and pasting between those documents. So thought being is that it makes sense to just put it all in one document for ease of use. It also covers some other IAA standard requirements related to having an overall rating included in the report before we have that in executive summary instead of the report, et cetera. Some inside baseball pieces that just makes it a little bit smoother for us. So if you're comfortable with that, that would be another change that we are proposing. Other changes to the audit report we will consider after we finish our review of our technology. There's some of the new technology that is out there, work paper systems, et cetera, can help you draft the report. They can take your issues that you identify and help put that into a more report format. We put it into a report format that the committee could see or others could use. So we may look to try to leverage that in the future, but I'll get to that in a little bit here. Outreach and coordination. Another item that the QAR team just noted as kind of a continual area for continual improvement is making sure that we're getting out there and making sure people know that internal audit exists, that we're staying abreast of what is happening within the institution, et cetera. And I think that's especially important given the amount of turnover that we've had throughout this organization. And so making sure that we really have those connections in place. One of the areas of particular note in the Institute of Internal Audit highlights it is our connections to the compliance, general counsel, and enterprise risk management. While in the past I had regular meetings with compliance and general counsel, we didn't have those established with ERM. We've now established that so that we're now meeting monthly with the enterprise risk management team. Is part of the goal of trying to make sure that we're staying aligned on what are the major risks, and are there areas in which we can leverage their work or they can leverage our work to reduce compliance burden. Also just expanded a number of one-on-ones I have regularly with senior leaders, to include monthly meetings with the provost, monthly meeting with EVP Goldman, and a number of other senior leaders, just to make sure that I'm hearing what people are worrying about, thinking about, working on, as there's been some change in some of the regular meeting structures where I'm not always at the cabinet meetings anymore as I was before, some of the other meetings where I would maybe more organically hear some of that information. The last item here is we're reconstituting what we refer to as the Audit Liaison Program. We established this right before the pandemic, and really was working with our staff to assign them to various units and their management throughout the organization to say, you know, here's an area where we would like you to stay abreast of what they're working on and what's going on in their world. And so we're going to be working at reconstituting that with, primarily thinking about making sure that they're getting out there in the fall to kind of offset our annual audit planning that happens every spring. Other internal process updates. This is more detail than the committee is probably used to receiving, but I do want to make sure you have this in part because of the functional reporting line. So I'm just being transparent with you on this. So from a team management perspective, we are making a number of updates to our procedures, our evaluations, annual trainings. This is to align with IAA standards. So an example of this is that a phrase that the Institute of Internal Audit now likes to use is professional courage. So we are baking that into our evaluations to make sure that we're giving people feedback on, are they demonstrating professional courage. We're also implementing some updates that were identified by the staff as just areas where they wanted some additional investment and focus. So thinking about our individual development plans or IDPs, and how we're managing our metrics associated to their individual performance, as well as the metrics we use internally to manage our project performance. For the technology review and assessment, I touched on this briefly before. I would say that the technology that we currently use is functional, but its number one feature is it's very, very cheap. We have a follow-up database system, for example, that was developed in-house. No one's really sure what year it was developed at this point, but we think about 25 years ago. It's an access database, so that means something maybe to Regent Kenyanya, that we hold together with some Band-Aids. But it works and it's free, and so that's nice. Similarly, our other major softwares that we use, again, main feature is they're cheap, but there's a lot of additional functionality that is out there now. Again, that could potentially help with reporting, could potentially help with the follow-up process. Some are building in artificial intelligence into the tools, data analytics. There's all sorts of things that are happening here. After doing an initial environment scan, I am planning on having the team kick off an RFP in FY26 to just say, is this something that we want to go forward with? Before we made any decision on that, I would bring it to the committee and let you know about it, though, before we make a final decision. Finally, an OIA strategic plan. So we've always had established goals, and our purpose is clearly defined on our website and in our documentation that we provide to the committee, but we've never had something that I'd really call out as a strategic plan. The new IAA standards require us to establish a strategic plan, which I intend to leverage those other existing documents. But I think it's also just good timing with the fact that the university is implementing a new strategic-wide or system-wide strategic plan, where we can say, how is our work making sure that we're aligning our strategic direction with the institution? So I plan to do that in FY26. All right, finally, with the chief auditor reporting lines. Just as a reminder to the committee, this was called out by the quality assurance review team that best practices by IAA standards is for there to be a functional reporting line to the committee, to the Audit and Compliance Committee, and a administrative reporting line to the president. By functional reporting line, I'm referring to things such as approval and oversight of the annual audit plan, final decisions related to any employment actions related to the chief auditor, et cetera. It's really to ensure the independence of the internal audit department, that we can, do our job as we see fit and as the committee sees fit. The administrative reporting line is much more operational processes, management of expenses, management of vacation, but also ensuring that there is a communication line between the president and other senior leaders and the chief auditor to make sure that the audit function is receiving the support it needs from the administration. We're getting timely responses, we're getting the information we need, et cetera. I will tell you that in practice, we are operating as though that existed. The president meets with me monthly. Again, I was just mentioned, I meet with the provost and EVP Goldman monthly. We're doing that, but that's really just because we all recognize it's the right thing to do, not because that there is that codified relationship that would exist if there was that dotted line administrative reporting line. So I'll continue to review potential models with the administration, with committee and board leadership. I'll tell you, I will operate in any model that the board sees fit and do my absolute best for the university and for the committee. But it's just something that you would have to all consider. It's ultimately not a decision that the internal audit department or the administration can take up. So for next steps, again, as a reminder, if you're comfortable with the changes to the audit charter, that would need to be approved at the June committee meeting. There will be this new review and approval process of the FY26 audit plan, instead of me just providing it to you and looking for your consent. There will be the additional proposed changes to the document materials for you to look at, including some of those schedules that we may remove, some of the metric changes, et cetera. And then there will be some just additional items in which I need to report to the committee. If you're comfortable with the audit report changes, so the combining of the audit report and changing of our issue rating system, I expect to have that go live after July 1, so with our FY26 reports. So you'll continue to see the reports as you've seen them until for the rest of this fiscal year, but we would then move over to the new template if you're comfortable with that. And then the three things that we will continue to work on in FY26 will be reviewing potential technology upgrades, looking at establishing a strategic plan, and then just overall reviewing the effectiveness of these implemented updates. Again, some of these things have not changed in 30 plus years, so we may make some amendments to it and realize, well, these actually need to be amended a little bit more. And then finally, again, the board will need to continue in next fiscal year to consider the chief auditor's reporting lines and whether or not you think this model is working or if you would like to go in a different direction. With that, I stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Questions? Ms. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Chair Gully, Chief Auditor Gulswick. Appreciate the presentation and discussion. This is really good work and comprehensive. I spent some time with it, and I was looking at the red line version, and I'd be like, why was that crossed out? I think that's important. And I'd read, I'm like, oh, okay, they moved it. And then I had a bunch of notes, and they were all moot. Because you did include the stuff somewhere there. So pretty thorough, and then, beefed up some of the areas you referred to. So just feedback on a couple items, supportive of the technology work for sure. Although if it makes you feel better in my work, we see large corporations running on Excel spreadsheets, like supporting a lot of transactions. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely important. A comment on QAR, and I think we talked about this previously. I don't know if it needs to be in the charter, but I mean, there is that requirement of the credentials of one person and then the other person's in higher education. Whether it's in the charter or in practice, I do think that another person from the team should be outside higher education, at least one. I know that wasn't possible this last time or something, but I've found that outsiders bring interesting perspective. But again, higher ed heavy, but have that one person in there. But I'm not proposing an amendment to the charter per se. In terms of the committee approving the audit plan, I think that's appropriate. I think that did come up in QAR conversations as well. The reviewers brought that up. You mentioned that we could consult with Mr. Langworthy or something. I imagine if we put that in the charter and the committee approves the charter and then the committee report is approved by the board, I think the board actually would be delegating that authority to the committee and might need to skip the step. But I know we have multiple policies, so it's possible there's another policy that disagrees with that. So that's probably where that's coming from. And then on the reporting line, I mean, talked about this a bit. It came up in QAR. And maybe a year ago, we changed some policy language, may, shall, could, something like that. I think for me, it's a subsequent question to the other conversation that you and I have had about, and that QAR reviewers brought up on how we align audit, compliance, and risk management. And I feel like that's a first question, and then this one will kind of follow. And I understand that that doesn't belong in the charter. I didn't see it. I didn't expect to see it, but that's really of interest to me in terms of how those three functions come together, what the committee's role is. And I've talked about it other times here where I do think some of those areas is where committee members can add value. And I think we started pretty strongly with risk. I've alluded to the foundation audit committee that I previously sat on and you sit on. And you look at that risk scorecard or register they have, and there's a movement ranking every year. And it feels like those are the conversations that the committee could give input into. And of course, talk about the audit stuff, but a lot of that is operational and we do defer to you, but yeah, so definitely overall supportive of the new charter. I don't have amendments per se, but I mean, that bringing together of the three functions, again, I don't have a proposal. The QAR reviewers said it's done differently it's one person, other places it's two people, other places they report here, other places they report there. But I do think there's some, dissonance is not the right word, because I know you all work together. I mean, you've made that clear and you bring that up, but then how do we just make that align for the committee?
Yeah. Regent Kelly, thank you, Regent Kenyanya, for the feedback. And honestly, I appreciate all of your insight on this, being on this committee for all these years. I think you're somebody who has some of the long view on this. So I appreciate you bringing that to bear here. A couple of things to respond to some of your items here. The IA standards require the new requirement is that we have to have one person who is a certified internal auditor. I elected to add the one person for higher education, because I thought that that's appropriate based upon the industry specific. That, okay, we really, if you have a different chief auditor sitting in this chair, the committee should be aware that this is, I think, appropriate. To your point, I would be open. We've done this in the past. We had the chief auditor from the Federal Reserve come. If we could identify a person, for the next time we come through, I'd be very open to that if that's what the committee would like. I would just want a little bit more flexibility in the audit plan or in the audit charter in order for us to be able to adjust that based upon what is possible. But I think that's good feedback and something that absolutely would consider, even though I know it's unlikely that you'll be sitting on the committee to see that come to fruition. For the approval of the audit plan, I have talked to Mr. Langworthy about this, and my preference, I will just tell you, my preference would be that ultimately the board does delegate that to the Audit and Compliance Committee for review and approval, just because you're going to be the ones who have the information. I'm going to explain to you, here's our risk assessment, all of that type of information that the full board's just not going to have. I do, as part of my annual audit planning, I do make myself available to meet with every single regent, regardless of whether or not they're on the audit committee or not, and that is to gather information. So hopefully they're seeing the things that they would like to be reflected, or they could communicate to any of you who are on the committee if they wanted to know why XYZ was not added or whatever it might be. But I just think the oversight makes more sense within the committee.
Chair Gully, no, on that point, I actually agree with you. What I was saying is that the process for that may be simpler than you alluded, in that if we put it in the charter, the committee approves the charter with go to the full board and committee report. The full board has then therefore delegated that to the, because I think you said it would initially need to go to full
Yeah.
board because it's not delegated, but I believe by putting it in the charter and the full board approving that, they are delegating it. So I agree with you.
Chair Gelli, Regent Kenyanya, I would like that to be true. Mr. Langworthy tells me it's not.
Okay, all right,
So I will tell you that we
It's
need to
no
update
fun.
the policy to be able to delegate it, is what he
Got it.
said. But again, that's my expectation. Then the last item, just briefly, the alignment of compliance in ERM. I think you're absolutely right that that's an important piece. Again, back to us making those additional meetings. I will say, and it's important for this committee to know that the institutional compliance officer is still an interim position. We haven't posted that yet. There's discussions with the administration on how that role should look and what should be involved in that role. But from my perspective, both compliance and ERM have connection to this committee as part of the overall board policy, and will always be coming here and providing information and presentations to the committee. And the committee should feel that they have access to those individuals. If you think about the solid line, dotted line conversation with the reporting line, in a way, it's a dotted line I see from a compliance, especially an institutional compliance officer, to this committee, that the board should feel that they can work with compliance office. And we need to be also working together to make sure that we are leveraging each other's work, et cetera, so that we don't overburden individuals.
Yes, Provost.
I'm going to chime in, Chair Gully. I wanted to offer an administrative perspective on the question about Quinn's reporting line. I started here 5 years ago when he originally reported to the president. He was a member of cabinet. I was here when the shift happened, so I've kind of experienced both of those worlds. And to a large extent, it's not going to matter to me personally moving forward, except that I can kind of offer my assessment that I think the risk to our institution was lower when the chief auditor had a reporting line to the president. He was in the cabinet meetings. He was involved in the ongoing discussions, especially around COVID and what we were doing and whether there would be follow-on implications. And we've also seen during this current emergency how his absence has been somewhat of a detriment. The automatic meetings that all the cabinet members are going to, twice a week, 3 times a week, right? He's not there. In fact, he reached out to me and explicitly asked to be added to the meeting that I run with the deans so that he can hear what they're hearing and their updates. And so I don't know where President Cunningham is on this, but I personally would support that kind of a reporting line.
Thank you, Provost Carson. Appreciate the feedback. Yeah, and I feel like this is something we should talk about more going forward. So appreciate it. With that, I'm going to move us on because we're being encouraged to adjourn in the next few minutes. So thank you for the great presentation, and thank you, committee members, for your excellent questions. That brings us to the information items. Chief Auditor Goswick, anything to highlight?
Yes, thank you, Chair Gelli, members of the committee. There are 2 information items before you today on page 54 of your docket. The first is the review of the external auditor relationship and services provided. This report is required by board policy to be provided to the committee annually. And it provides the administration's evaluation of external auditor services in the previous fiscal year. So as a reminder, FY24 was the first year Clifton Larson Allen provided our external audit services. And overall, the administration found that they provided excellent service, with CLA demonstrating strong higher education experience, a fair and robust audit approach, and reasonable engagement fees. A few opportunities for improvement were identified, but these are more in the spirit of continuous improvement and would be expected, especially given that this was their first year working with us in that capacity. The second information item is notification of a completed comprehensive review of the board policy referred to as internal controls. This policy establishes the control framework for the university, which is the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, or COSO, and delegates responsibility for establishing sound internal controls to the president. The comprehensive review identified no major changes except for one technical correction detailed in your docket. If the committee raises no additional items with this policy, the comprehensive review policy or process will be considered complete, and the policy will be implemented with that change. And with that, I or representatives from the administration and the audience stand for any questions you may have.
Questions? Okay. Seeing none, Thank you so much for the information items, and there being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned.